"Ma'am, you can't be Eleanor Martinez," the cemetery administrator said, her face pale. "Eleanor Martinez already purchased her plot, paid for her funeral package, and we have her signature right here." She showed me the papers dated 2 weeks ago while I was in the hospital for gallbladder surgery. The signature was perfect because it was mine, just not signed by me. My name is Eleanor Martinez, and at 65 years old, I stood in the austere office of Rydeside Cemetery in Baltimore, looking at funeral arrangements that someone had meticulously planned for my death. The administrator, a thin woman named Patricia Holbrook, held documents that showed I had selected a prime plot overlooking the Patapsco River, chosen a mahogany casket with silk lining, and even specified the music for my service, Pachelbel's canon, which I had always despised. The morning had started innocently enough. I'd driven to Rydeside to visit my husband Carlos's grave, as I did every Sunday since his passing 4 years ago. The Maryland autumn was particularly beautiful this year, with the maples turning brilliant red and gold against the gray sky. I'd brought fresh chrysanthemums, Carlos's favorite, and was planning to spend an hour telling him about my week, about the grandchildren he never got to meet, about the life that continued despite his absence. But as I walked through the cemetery gates, the groundskeeper, old Thomas, who'd worked there for 30 years, had stopped me with an odd expression. "Mrs. Martinez," he'd said hesitantly, "I didn't expect. They said you were. Are you feeling better?" The confusion in his weathered face had unsettled me. "I'm fine, Thomas. Why wouldn't I be?" He'd shuffled his feet, clearly uncomfortable. "It's just, your son was here yesterday with the funeral director, looking at your plot. They said you were in hospice, that it wouldn't be long now." My son, Michael. The mention of his name sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the October wind. Michael, who hadn't visited me in 6 months, who only called when he needed money, who had been pressuring me to sign over my house to him for tax purposes. Michael, who knew I'd been in the hospital for routine gallbladder surgery 2 weeks ago because he'd called asking about my will while I was still groggy from anesthesia. Patricia Holbrook's office was cramped and smelled of old roses and furniture polish. She sat across from me, the desk between us covered with documents that detailed my supposed final wishes. Each page was more disturbing than the last. Not only had someone purchased the plot and casket, but they'd also arranged for a funeral service, a wake at Donnelly's funeral home, and even ordered catering from Giuseppe's Italian restaurant, enough food for 100 people. The total came to $47,000, Patricia said, adjusting her reading glasses. Paid in full with a cashier's check. Very unusual. Most people use payment plans. I studied the signature on the contracts. It was uncanny. The way I curved my E, the distinctive loop in my Z, even the way I underlined my name. But I knew I hadn't signed these papers. During the dates in question, I'd been in Johns Hopkins Hospital, recovering from surgery, barely able to hold a pen from the IV in my hand. "Who brought these documents in?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Patricia consulted her computer. "A Mr. Michael Martinez. He said he was your son, handling arrangements because you were too ill to come yourself. He had power of attorney documentation." Power of attorney. Those words made my blood run cold. I had never given Michael power of attorney. Never. After Carlos died, I'd specifically updated all my legal documents with my lawyer, making my niece Rosa my healthcare proxy and executor. Michael had been furious when he found out, but I'd seen how he'd handled his father's illness, more concerned about the medical bills eating into his inheritance than his father's comfort. "I need copies of everything," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "And I need to know if the grave has been prepared." Patricia's face went even paler. "Mrs. Martinez, are you saying you didn't authorize any of this? I was in the hospital having my gallbladder removed. I was on morphine. I certainly wasn't planning my funeral." She stood abruptly, paper scattering. "We need to call the police. This is fraud. And if someone is planning—" She trailed off, but we both knew what she was thinking. If someone had gone to this much trouble to arrange my funeral, they might be planning to ensure I needed it. Detective Ray Washington from Baltimore PD's Financial Crimes Unit wasn't what I'd expected. Young, perhaps 35, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, he listened to my story without interruption, occasionally jotting notes in a small notebook. We sat in my living room in my row house in Canton, the autumn light filtering through lace curtains my mother had crocheted 50 years ago. "Mrs. Martinez," he said when I'd finished, "this isn't just fraud. If someone is preparing for your death while you're alive and healthy, we need to consider this a potential threat to your safety. Tell me about your son." The words poured out. Michael's gambling debts that I'd paid 3 times before cutting him off. His divorce from Janet, who'd fled to her mother's in Florida with their 2 children after Michael had emptied their joint accounts. His job losses, each accompanied by elaborate stories of conspiracy and betrayal. His increasing desperation for money, and his fury when I'd refused to mortgage my house to pay off his latest creditors. "He knows I have life insurance," I admitted. 2 policies, one from Carlos's employer, worth $200,000, and another I purchased myself, worth $300,000. He's the beneficiary on both. Detective Washington's expression darkened. $500,000, plus your house, which in this neighborhood is worth what, $400,000? About that, I confirmed. It's been in Carlos's family for 60 years, paid off completely. "So we're looking at nearly $1 million in motivation," he said quietly. "Mrs. Martinez, do you have somewhere else you can stay?" But before I could answer, my phone rang. It was Michael. "Mom?" His voice was strange, tight with an emotion I couldn't identify. "How are you feeling? I heard you were out of the hospital." "I'm fine, Michael," I said carefully, aware of Detective Washington's gesture to keep him talking. "Why do you ask?" "Just concerned about you. You know, at your age, with your health problems, anything could happen." "What health problems, Michael? I just had my gallbladder removed. The doctor says I'm healthy as a horse otherwise." There was a pause. "Mom, you know what the doctors told me about your heart, about the cancer." "What cancer, Michael? What are you talking about?" His voice changed, becoming harder. "Don't play games, Mom. I know you've been hiding it, trying to be strong. But I've seen the medical reports. Stage 4. The doctors give you maybe a month, 2 at most." My blood turned to ice. There were no medical reports. There was no cancer. But Michael was speaking as if he absolutely believed what he was saying, or needed someone else to believe it. After Michael's call, Detective Washington brought in additional resources. Within hours, my small row house had become a command center. FBI agent Sarah Coleman from the Healthcare Fraud Division arrived with a computer specialist who began tracking down the supposed medical reports Michael had mentioned. What they found was terrifying in its sophistication. Someone had created an entire false medical history for me. Fake reports from oncologists I'd never seen, test results from procedures I'd never had, even psychiatric evaluations suggesting I was in denial about my terminal condition. The documents were uploaded to a medical record-sharing platform that Michael had access to as my emergency contact, a designation I'd never authorized. "This isn't amateur work," Agent Coleman said, studying the forged documents on her laptop. "These are professionally done. Medical terminology is correct, formatting is perfect. Someone with medical knowledge created these." That's when I remembered Diane. Diane Castellano, Michael's girlfriend, who I'd met only twice. She was a nurse at Maryland General, or at least that's what Michael had told me. Pretty in a hard way, with calculating eyes and an artificial smile. She'd been oddly interested in my health during our brief meetings, asking detailed questions about my medications, my doctors, my medical history. "We need to look into Diane Castellano," I said. "She's a nurse. She'd have the knowledge to create these documents." Detective Washington was already typing into his phone. His expression grew grim as he read. "Diane Castellano, licensed practical nurse. But here's the interesting part. She was suspended from Maryland General 6 months ago for suspected drug theft. She's under investigation for taking opioids meant for hospice patients." Hospice patients. The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. "She's been working at a private hospice company for the last 4 months," he continued reading. "Brighton Hospice Care. They specialize in end-of-life care." Agent Coleman and Detective Washington exchanged glances. Mrs. Martinez, Coleman said carefully, has anyone suggested you need hospice care? Has anyone from Brighton Hospice contacted you? No, I said, but then I remembered something. Wait, I did get a call last week. They said they were confirming my intake appointment. I thought it was a wrong number. The plan they hatched was dangerous, but I agreed to it immediately. If Michael and Diane were planning something, we needed proof, real, undeniable proof that would hold up in court. So I became bait. I called Michael back, my voice shaky and confused, not entirely an act given what I'd learned. Michael, honey, I'm scared. You're right. I haven't been feeling well. Maybe we should talk about arrangements. The eagerness in his voice was sickening. Of course, Mom. I'll come over tomorrow. Diane will be with me. She knows about these things, from her work. The next morning, I was fitted with a wire. Agent Coleman sat in a van outside while Detective Washington and 2 officers waited in my basement. My neighbor, Mrs. Chen, had been evacuated for her safety, though she'd been told it was a gas leak issue. Michael arrived at 10, Diane by his side carrying a medical bag. She was dressed in scrubs, though she had no legitimate reason to be making a house call. They sat on my sofa, faces arranged in expressions of concern that didn't reach their eyes. Mom, Michael began, we need to talk about your final wishes. I know it's hard, but with the cancer spreading so fast. What cancer? I asked, letting confusion color my voice. The doctors haven't said anything about cancer. Diane leaned forward, her voice professional, soothing. Eleanor, it's common for patients to experience denial. The brain scans show significant metastases. You've probably been having headaches, confusion, memory problems. I haven't had any of those things, I protested. You just don't remember, she said smoothly. That's part of the condition. But we're here to help. I've brought some medication that will make you more comfortable. She opened her medical bag, pulling out a syringe and a vial. This is morphine. It will help with the pain you must be experiencing. I'm not in any pain, I said, pulling back as she prepared the injection. Michael grabbed my arm, his grip firm. Mom, please, let Diane help you. You're suffering and you don't even realize it. The morphine will make you comfortable, Diane said, approaching with the needle. You'll just sleep, peacefully, no more confusion, no more fear. That's when Detective Washington burst through the basement door. The next few minutes were chaos. Diane dropped the syringe, which Detective Washington immediately bagged as evidence. Michael released my arm and stood, his face cycling through shock, rage, and finally a cold calculation as he realized he'd been caught. You recorded this? He snarled at me. Your own son? You were going to kill me, I said, my voice stronger now that the police were here. You forged medical documents, arranged my funeral, and were about to inject me with God knows what. Diane was already in handcuffs, but she laughed, a harsh sound. It's morphine, you stupid old woman. A merciful death for someone who's already dying. We were doing you a favor. She's not dying, Agent Coleman said, entering from where she'd been listening. And what's in that syringe isn't morphine, is it? We'll test it, but I'm betting it's something much stronger. Something that would cause immediate respiratory failure in someone who isn't opioid tolerant. Michael's lawyer brain kicked in. You can't prove intent. We were trying to help my dying mother. Diane is a medical professional providing palliative care. A suspended nurse, Detective Washington corrected, suspected of stealing drugs. And your mother isn't dying, which you know because you forged all the medical documents saying she was. We have the digital trail, Michael. Every fake report, every forged signature. And now we have you on tape, attempting to administer a potentially lethal injection to a healthy woman. They arrested both of them. As they led Michael away, he turned to look at me one last time. You were going to die anyway, he said coldly. Everyone does. I just needed it to happen sooner. Do you know what you cost me by living this long? Every month you stay alive costs me money I need now. The investigation that followed revealed the full scope of their plan. Michael and Diane had been together for over a year, meeting at a casino where Michael's gambling debts had reached 6 figures. Diane had been stealing drugs from the hospice for months, selling most of them, but keeping some for special projects. I wasn't their first victim. 3 other elderly patients from Brighton Hospice had died unexpectedly in the past 6 months, all shortly after family members had made large funeral arrangements. All had been under Diane's care. All had died from complications that were never fully investigated because they were already terminal, or so everyone thought. The FBI discovered that Diane had been creating false medical records for these patients too, making them appear sicker than they were. In 2 cases, family members had been involved, promised kickbacks from insurance payouts. In 1 case, like mine, the family member thought their relative was actually dying and was simply helping ease their passing. The $47,000 for my funeral arrangements had come from Michael's latest loan shark, who had been promised double his money back within a month, right after my life insurance paid out. The cemetery plot overlooking the river was non-refundable, already carved with my name, waiting for an occupant who refused to die on schedule. Michael was charged with attempted murder, conspiracy, fraud, forgery, and elder abuse. Diane faced the same charges, plus 3 counts of murder for the hospice patients. The trial was a sensation in Baltimore, the story of a son so consumed by greed and gambling addiction that he'd planned his mother's murder with the same casual efficiency as planning a vacation. Michael was convicted on all counts and sentenced to 35 years in prison. Diane received life without parole for the murders of the 3 hospice patients. During the trial, it came out that Michael had been planning this for months, even before my gallbladder surgery. He'd seen the surgery as an opportunity. I'd be weak, on pain medication, easy to convince that something more serious was wrong. The cemetery refunded most of the funeral expenses, though they kept the plot. I sometimes drive by Riverside Cemetery and see my headstone. They couldn't remove it without my permission, and I chose to leave it there as a reminder. Eleanor Martinez, it says, with my birth year and a blank space for the death date. Coming home soon, the inscription reads. But not yet. Not on anyone's schedule but my own. I changed the beneficiary on my life insurance policies to my niece Rosa and donated a significant portion of my savings to a fund for elder abuse victims. The house in Canton, Carlos's family home, will go to a historical preservation society when I die. Baltimore has lost too much of its history already. I'm 67 now, 2 years past the date Michael had planned for my death. I still live alone in my row house, though I've installed security cameras and changed all the locks. Mrs. Chen next door checks on me daily, and we've become close friends. I volunteer at a senior center, teaching others about financial fraud and the importance of securing their legal documents. Sometimes I think about Michael in prison. Does he regret what he did, or does he only regret getting caught? His children, my grandchildren, are being raised by their mother in Florida. I send them birthday cards and Christmas presents, though I don't know if they receive them. Their mother wants nothing to do with the Martinez family, and I can't blame her. The empty grave still waits at Riverside Cemetery, a monument to greed and betrayal, but also to survival. Every Sunday, I visit Carlos's grave, bringing his chrysanthemums, telling him about my week. I pass my own headstone on the way, that granite marker of my refused death, and I smile. Not yet, I think. Not yet. The groundskeeper, Thomas, still tips his hat when he sees me, though he can never quite meet my eyes. He thought he was seeing a ghost that day, and in a way he was. The ghost of who I might have been if I hadn't fought back, if I hadn't questioned, if I hadn't refused to die on someone else's timeline. Trust, I've learned, is not something you give freely to anyone, not even family. Especially not family who see you not as a mother, not as a person, but as an obstacle to their inheritance. Michael wanted me dead so badly, he'd already buried me in his mind, already spent the money he'd get from my death. But I'm still here, still breathing, still living in my house in Canton, still visiting my husband's grave every Sunday. And that empty plot with my name on it? It's a reminder that someone wanted me dead, but also that I'm very much alive. Someday I'll need it, but that day will come when nature decides, not when a greedy son and his murderous girlfriend try to schedule it. I'm Eleanor Martinez. I'm 67 years old, and I'm not ready to fill that grave yet.